Hey guys, been a minute, huh? The big gap between videos is because I got really busy, but now I'm not as busy, so I can start making videos again. Also, I'm learning Blender. There's this game I played a while ago on stream, and I've been pretty fixated on it since then. SIGNALIS. This video is going to contain a bunch of spoilers. I seriously recommend playing the game before watching this video. It's really good, and I don't want to detract from your experience when you play it, so just go play it. If you got past the intro, you're fine. You didn't really get that many spoilers. Just go buy the game. Go buy the game. Just go buy. SIGNALIS is a 2.5D survival horror game reminiscent of classics like Silent Hill or Resident Evil. I actually haven't played the former. You take a top-down view, occasionally going into first person sometimes, and control this badass android space lesbian named Elster as she tries to find somebody. The game is only $20 on Steam, and for that price you could almost buy a sixth of Assassin's Creed Shadows Ultimate Edition. I honestly didn't even know this game existed until, among my thousands of follow Twitter accounts, I stumbled across this totally sick-ass animator who is like always making fan animations for this game that are all just so top tier and hilarious that it's pretty much half of what pops up on Tenor GIFs if you look up SIGNALIS. I showed my friend some of the animations and he was like,
"Oh yeah, man, that's SIGNALIS. I've been seeing it a lot on Twitter and at TikTok. It's pretty fun."
It kind of looks cool. It's like those old PlayStation games, like Silent Hill, I think.
Raw Freddy Fazbear getting kicked in the balls, and I'll buy it for you.
What the fuck? The community for this game is full of super talented diehards who basically flip a coin every day on whether they want to make meme shit or go feels Batman mode. This is one of those games where the community does a really good job at keeping the drive for this game alive, and I'm completely along for the ride. There's even this whole subcult specifically for a telepathic android girl named Calibri, and like... This game was made by a pair of German developers known as Rose Engine. They initially made a brief 2D platforming game called Ascend, where you had to avoid taking damage in order to get different endings. It was short, sweet, and pretty cool, but the two were already working on another game, SIGNALIS. It started out as another 2D game, this time a side-scroller, but eventually evolved into the 3D look that it has now. They've been working on it since 2014, and in 2020 it was picked up by Humble Games, which allowed the two to complete the game within 2 years. One thing that was an immediate draw to me was the clear inspirations from older horror games. The low poly models work really well with the retro tech that makes the game look all like pixelated looking. Most of the work done to the graphics is through a lot of cool filters, camera tricks, and baked textures, and it's really dope to see the liberties taken and how much can be conveyed by using these methods on otherwise limited models. There's even optional take controls and a CRT filter if you truly want to immerse yourself in the early 2000s. However, there's a lot more influences and references that seep into this game than some might realize. Although it kind of does say it in the Steam page, but whatever. Evangelion, Ghost in the Shell, The Shining, these really old paintings, and proposed long-term nuclear waste warning signs. Also, JoJo's? I'm not really sure about that one. This game heavily relies on the concept of esotericism to drive its story. While the story itself is pretty linear up to a certain point, it leaves a lot of breadcrumbs that are nearly impossible to completely pick up on your first time going through, as well as contradicting circumstances and set pieces that it will confuse the absolute shit out of you. This is the kind of game that leaves an insane amount of stuff to look into and piece together, and I gotta say, I absolutely love to dig into this kind of stuff. Not only does it bring you back to replay it, but it's also just a really good way of bringing the community together and sharing everyone's interpretations of the story. Even if you don't completely catch on to everything that happens, you should be able to pick up on the main storyline that unmasks itself in the third act. Prepare to delve into a game that leaves more questions than answers. This is SIGNALIS. The game starts off with you playing as Elster in a spaceship named the Penrose. It apparently crashed in the snowy tundra. You find a hazard suit and make your way out, and then after crawling through the world's least inconspicuous cave and grabbing the King in Yellow, suddenly appear in a bathroom. You'll notice pretty quickly that the story doesn't remotely make sense in terms of setting, as the more you progress, the weirder locations Elster finds herself in. You start off in the snowy tundra, which, if you look off into the distance, can actually see a planet that kind of looks like Jupiter, implying that you're on one of its moons. Then after going into the weird hole, you appear in the bathroom of S-23 Sierpinski, a mining facility on a planet known as Lang, which is definitely not the same planet. If you pay attention, it's implied that all of these planets take after ours. Later in the game, of course. If I'm being honest, I am kind of paraphrasing information from this video by Indie Explorer. If you'd like to see another more in-depth perspective on the story, I'd recommend checking out their video on SIGNALIS. Kitez is a body full of red sands, that's Mars. Bouillon has a floating palace and a sun that can burn you alive, Venus. Veneta is blue, has a lot of water, and is the cradle of humanity, Earth, of course. The nation capital, Heimat, is likely Titan due to the moon's similarities to that of Earth. Broadfront is likely Jupiter's moon Europa, as it matches the description of having a sea under a bed of ice, aka that tundra that you find yourself spawn in the beginning. Then Lang, due to its position on the solar map, it's Pluto. Most of the game does take place in Lang, and there's a lot of references to Hell, which Pluto being the god of the underworld is a pretty easy connection to make. Lang is also a reference to H.P. Lovecraft, which in his stories is an anomalous place where realities converge. Also, the creator of the game said that this game is an alternate timeline to ours, which is technically in the same solar system. Anyway, with that all out of the way, let's actually start in a somewhat coherent order. You find your way out of the ship, into the tundra, down a candy red hole, and climb into a room with a book, The King in Yellow. This book is actually a piece of real-life literature written by Robert W. Chambers. The book itself is an anthology of 10 stories surrounding a book of a play of the same title. The King in Yellow starts off as a pretty harmless play consisting of 2 acts. The first act is usually read through without issue by the characters, but as soon as anyone starts to read the second act, they're pulled into it and fully read it. As soon as they do, they're driven mad by the contents within. The play itself within the story is extremely fragmented and incomplete, leaving the reader to only imagine what kind of message is left in the second act. Once Elster grabs this info hazard of a book, the game really starts. Elster now appears in the entrance of a mining facility, making her way through with a leftover keycard and even running into what remains of the crew here. All of them, save for one, are replica units, like Elster. You learn that in this setting, humans are called gestalts, and you're looking for one, but it's a little confusing as to who exactly. You soon run into that one gestalt, named Issa, who happens to be on her own mission, which may or may not entail also looking for someone, and she just kind of walks away. Okay. After walking around and finding a pistol and a keycard, you move onward to a classroom where you jump down a hole and find yourself in the next floor, filled with these undead zombie-like replica models occupying the halls. You walk around the floor and find 2 ends of a butterfly key for this little chest, and then, upon grabbing the stone tablet inside of it, take a new perspective. A fleshy, pulsating mass and a wall with 6 insignias, followed by a first-person radio station section. Now this is what I'm talking about. I fucking love Call of Duty, yeah! Sitting in the midst of the snowy tundra, you enter a small, claustrophobic radio station and grab a small earpiece. After doing a pretty easy radio-based puzzle, you appear back in a third person and now somehow have the earpiece. You gain access to an elevator and enter a new floor. Finding an incinerator room with thermite flares, you read that the growth taking over these zombified replicas has to be completely incinerated to keep them from reanimating. I'm sure you can guess because 90% of all horror games do it, but reading is one of the main ways to piece together the story.
Huh?
You'll notice a trend with this game when it comes to how it segments itself. It puts you in a large area that you can mostly traverse through, but you have to walk around and find smaller puzzle pieces in order to unlock the smaller areas to get a single piece of a much larger puzzle that then unlocks a larger area for you to, again, cycle through. This first big level deals with 5 keycards that correspond to the elements: fire, wind, water, earth, and gold on the bottom. After gathering all the keys, you enter the locked room and hop down another hole, meeting the next replica unit. Oh boy, here we go. What? What? No! After defeating this laser-wielding behemoth, you meet another replica, Adler, who, well, he kind of just does that manipulative evil character thing where he's like, oh yeah, I'll help you out, and then he just kind of takes your photo and then just... What? you did. Oh, is this Alina? You pass through the dark hallways of a school and start peeking into an opened room. You find a white-haired girl getting bullied by masked classmates, and then awaken as Elster once more, sitting next to a pile of other Elsters? After doing some more survival horror puzzle stuff, you hop down another hole. And now you get another vision of Issa, this time running into Adler. He tries pulling the same friendly shtick he did on you, but Issa doesn't pass a vibe check. Before you can see what ends up of the interaction, you return to Elster again. After turning on an elevator that I feel like I would have only ever seen on Live Leak and navigating through 4 more floors, you run into more puzzles and lore bits sprinkled with them. Something I'd like to mention before I continue is that the sound design and soundtrack are amazing in this game, as expected with all banger horror video games. The music is a really good mix between soft melodic pianos that make you feel like you're maybe safe versus the absolute despair that pretty much all the other tracks instill in your weak, non-bioresonant, wrinkly gestalt brain. The soundtrack was made by Cicada Sirens and 1,000 Eyes, which, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really know if they've worked on any other big projects. Cicada Sirens is working on this other web series called Revenant though, so that's pretty cool. But back to Signalis. The lonely halls only echo the sounds of Elster and the undead replicas standing in your way. Everything is ramped up to 11 when a fight ensues, and the only respite you're granted are in the moments of importance to the story. And while they aren't on the same level as, say, Dead Space, not even the safe rooms truly feel safe or welcoming. Back to the game, you begin to learn a lot more about the replica units and how exactly they function when it comes to their relation to, well, being replicas of gestalts. They all have different levels of needs to keep themselves mentally stable, with simpler ones like Mina only needing teddy bears, while Colibris, which use this telepathic ability called bioresonance, need a well-stocked library of books. If any of the replicas begin to suffer from quote-unquote persona degradation, also known as gaining free will, they are promptly destroyed and replaced, especially units like the Colibris, as they can cause a rapid decline in stabilization in others due to bioresonance. Within these series of floors, you're surrounded by even more propaganda posters and notes scattered by the people who once worked here. By the time you reach the end of these puzzles in this area, it's pretty easy to piece together that this place is a facility for an authoritarian nation. The Yusan Nation employs interrogative, propagandist, and bioresonant tactics to keep those under their command in line. Good thing that growth is around to keep them from telling you what to do, though. You make it to the bedroom of Falk, the military super soldier leader of this installation. Like the Colibris, she also has bioresonance, but is currently bedridden, so surely this won't turn into some kind of boss battle later in the game. After doing more puzzle stuff, and incidentally finding another copy of The King in Yellow, you enter Adler's room and read his diaries. His latest diary writes on how he's stuck in some kind of time loop. Every written entry has the exact same date. Before you manage to get to this diary using the astrolabe though, he had left another earlier diary on his desk. Time doesn't seem to have started looping, but it does detail how he had a dream where he had been conducting a test on a certain white-haired girl in order to find out if she had bioresonance. On the levels above, there seemed to be only a surface-level understanding of the zombifying growths taking over the replicas and just straight-up killing gestalts. But down here, people like Adler and Falk are somehow suffering this weird cyclical side effect of this incident. Using Adler's keycard, you make your way down into the mine and start Chapter 2. Chapter 2 starts off with Issa facing off against Adler again. He remarks how he's done this countless times before getting stabbed in the eye and falling into the mines below. The screen is then enveloped in a circle with the German word SIGNALIS, which means cycle. How do you fuck up that bad? You have a gun. Why would you stand in front of a hole? If it wasn't obvious yet, there's some kind of repeating cycle going on. The dead Elster units in the elevator, Adler being aware that he's done this before, and the diary all hint toward him being stuck in some sort of infinite loop with Elster and Issa. This time though, Elster doesn't die in the elevator, and Issa is able to get the jump on him. Going into the mines yourself, you basically just do a mad sprint to reach the point where Issa and Adler had their scuffle. But if you explore the mines, you can run into a friendly mina, and these two poor replicas. You jump down the giant hole and are greeted with a blinding red timer, although it should be familiar at this point because all of the save points in this game are also blinding red. You traverse a beach filled with notes and skulls. Most of the notes sitting around are somewhat unintelligible. The shining cliffside tops sit out of reach from you, and the waves hit the sands beneath your feet. This landscape is the Shore of Oblivion, a piece by Jürgen Bracht. Jürgen Bracht? I don't even know how to pronounce anything. Also, and this is something I didn't even notice when I was playing it through the first time, the King in Yellow makes its third appearance and sits just out of reach, laying underneath the cliffside rocks. It's not really possible to see it right now, but rather than the 6 seals that it has in the beginning of the game, it now only has 3. Inevitably, the time hits 0, and Elster lands in nowhere. It reminisces of old, abandoned industrial facilities that have completely lost their luster, with rust and dust plaguing the dimly lit and nonsensical rooms. As you travel further in, you begin to notice that there's red, pulsating masses in the walls, and eventually come to face another hole, this time entirely made of meat. Once you jump into it, you finally run into Issa, who's currently dealing with an enemy called the New Way. On my playthrough, I kinda completely ran out of ammo and had to wait like 3 minutes before Issa shot it with her rifle. Though, because she has noodle arms, the recoil of the blast just knocks her out. You can come back around and wake her up with a bottle of ammonia to get the rifle, which is something I didn't realize I could do on my first playthrough. So I just had a bunch of useless rifle ammo. Now navigating this fleshy industrial complex, you have to find 6 stone tablets to fit into this door, one of which you already had from the radio puzzle in the first chapter. Once you manage to fill the slabs, you enter the door and appear at the beginning of the game once more. This time the red hole within is made of the flesh. You confront Adler at the stone portal, and cross the threshold that Falk had done before. Walking through the red sands, you find pillars jutting from the ground, other Elster units lying on the floor, and reach the Penrose vessel you had left in the beginning. As you approach, you're hit with a bombardment of imagery, unfamiliar characters, eerie messages, paintings, all while Elster goes closer to the ship. Climbing the Penrose, Elster attempts to open it, but ultimately fails. And the game ends. Wait, what? I am completely and utterly confused. Who was Alina? Who was the white-haired woman? Why was Issa here? What did Falk and Adler have to do with anything? What? The game takes you back to the title screen, a dead Elster sitting and no longer moving her eye toward her cursor. Upon clicking any button other than settings, the game begins anew, almost exactly as it had the first time, but now something is different. The first thing I noticed was that Elster was wearing a cap, but it turns out that the entire Penrose is still functional and floating in space. I had legitimately thought this was the ending of the game. It was certainly pretty damn convincing. After doing a maintenance check on the shuttle, you have the option to read classified documents akin to those for the other replicas, but this time it's for the Elster unit. It's left unopened and unread, and upon opening it, reveals the documents that Elster is a much more quiet and brutish unit who's specialized to work alone. Considering all the time we've played as her, this really doesn't come as much of a surprise. She'll suffer from persona degradation if exposed to any kind of movies or music, or if someone decides to talk about the war with her. Elster enters the room of Ariane Yan, the Gestalt in charge of the shuttle, and Ariane decides to put on some music. Despite ripping her arm off, Elster is bound and determined to reach her goal, that promise that the game keeps telling us to remember. Entering the ship, you run into some sprawled out notes of someone who appears to be sick. Their vision's blurry, they've lost teeth, blood, hair, suffering enough just to want to go to sleep. Elster goes to the cryo room where another Elster unit lays, this one being unique from the rest as it sports a set of armor. Taking the arm and the armor off of the past Elster unit for herself, Elster now realizes who she's been looking for. It's not Alina, it's Ariane, the white-haired woman, and she refuses to stop now. Entering another fleshy hole once more, you enter the shore of Oblivion again, this time with unlimited time. The notes on the ground talk about an ancient living being that absorbs all it touches. Is this a reference? The king in yellow again sits out of reach, this time with 2 seals. In order to leave the shore this time, you enter the boat sitting on the sands and sail off. Chapter 3 begins. Elster appears in the bathroom from the start, staring at herself in the mirror once more. As you traverse the first floor of the facility again, the mass of flesh has begun to spread. You go to the classroom and jump down the hole once more. And there is a lot of fucking holes in this game. A cutscene plays, Adler transforming into a grotesque zombie-like version of himself as he sits over Falk's inanimate body. He comments, "It's like everything was taken apart and put back together by someone who doesn't understand how it works. I have become whole again. I wear no mask, and I hate everything." A brief image of Issa appears once more before taking us to a completely different celestial body, Rodfront, the moon where Ariane was raised, the snowy tundra. Traversing the complex, you now have to find 6 tarot cards which correspond to the moon phases of each planet. With each tarot card you find, the mass from earlier slowly grows throughout the map. As you gather them, you have to enter a bookstore of the Ito family. Inside, you find the full Alina Sio photo you had from earlier. You learn of bioresonance and how it's used within the military, but how it isn't really understood that well. Then you find a databank of what I can only assume to be is a mishmash of somewhat plot-relevant characters, and the concept of pareidolia. Pareidolia is a concept that explains how people find importance in specific kind of objects. Rodfront, the moon that you're on, sits under the watch of a red eye, the eternal red storm that's on Jupiter. Early on, it was a reminder of the struggle that early settlers of Rodfront endured while under the Yuuzhan Empire, aka before the revolutionary nation was established. Today though, the idea of an eye watching over everyone seems to still be pretty prevalent. It states how adults would paint ration marks red to represent those who died in the revolution, but it notes how the red coins still share a resemblance to the red eye. All these points are somewhat disconnected, but do matter in the overarching story. During this point in the game, you also run into Issa one last time. She states that she couldn't find her, that she looked everywhere, and that the person she's been looking for isn't here anymore. She gives up on her search, and in doing so succumbs to the fleshy growth that proceeds to decimate her body, leaving nothing but a gross, puddly string of meat and blood on the floor. One of the tarot cards, Death, sits in this bookstore, underneath a photo of Issa and her sister, Erica. Erica's photo is heavily damaged. Once you find all the tarot cards, you have to use the corresponding blacklight image to match the moon phases written on the main wall of the apartment complex. The fleshy mass brings you the last piece of the puzzle, and a hole opens up in the wall after solving it. It leads to the room with the king in yellow, now left with no seals on it. Elster recognizes everything in the room this time, seeing it as Ariane's old home. A lock safe appears in the corner as well, but right now you're unable to access it. You grab the king in yellow and leave the room. Within Ariane's home sits scattered mail about her upcoming military service, and how she had signed up for the Penrose program as well. Ariane had mentioned to her mother the photo of Alina, which will be important in a moment. Upon leaving the room, you find scattered notes of that from Falk, who seems to be losing her grip on what's real and fake, who she is and who Ariane is, as if she believes she's Elster. Adler also has left a note, which simply warns Elster not to go any further. Hater, you approach the room of the military leader, and the corrupted final boss awakens. Falk. As the music kicks it into final gear, Elster and the corrupted Falk face off in a mostly flat but changing landscape, taking the shape of the facilities and areas you had been exploring throughout the game. Falk's main way of attacking you is through her floating spears, of which you can pick up to use against her once you weaken her enough. Aside from that, she has these black hole things, and she also summons other corrupted units to help her out. But you know the drill with those at this point. After stabbing her with enough spears, you defeat her, and finally reach the end. Elster finds herself in the red, sandy void once more. Adler's standing at the gate to stop her. Between their really brief scuffle, Adler manages to get a good stab into Elster's eye, but Elster manages to shoot him down before he can do any more damage. This guy is a hater, man! Elster approaches the Penrose, this time successfully opening the hatch. You explore the decrepit Penrose, and as you traverse the ship, Elster explains how everything had begun to fall apart. The Penrose program was a mission that shot willing participants into outer space in order to try and scout for other habitable planets. Arian and Elster were the only two on here, but as 3,000 cycles were reached, which is their way of measuring time, the ship had already begun to break down. The mission briefing that they were left with let them know that trying to survive was futile and that they should end their lives quickly, but the two refused. Elster attempted to keep the ship functional while Arian began to ration and use her cryopod to keep herself alive. She grew more sick from the radiation leakage as the ship continued to break down. As this went on, apparently all the way up to 5,000 cycles, Arian and Elster decided to make a promise, one that Elster was ultimately unable to keep. The photo of Alina, the soldier that we've seen so much of, is mentioned in the beginning of this entire segment. A note from Arian reveals that part of the reason she had gone on the Penrose was because of this soldier, but ultimately, her wanting to leave was due to her being sick of everything happening in her life. Living on Rot Front, working at the photo store, the fake smiles, and those who whispered behind her back. She felt the Penrose was the only way for her to escape. Depending on how you played the game, you can get one of 3 endings. Before we go into these though, I'd like to mention how awesome the concept of playstyle determining how the ending goes is. I've heard that this is also how Silent Hill does it, but usually in games that have multiple endings, you, as the player, usually influence the story much more directly with choices that it just kind of gives you. I just think it's a super neat little, mechanic. It's a passive way to get people to experience different endings. It's a really sneaky way to do it, and I like that. There's a lot of sneaky stuff in SIGNALIS. Okay, anyways, leave. The leave ending is obtained by playing the game much more passively. You have to keep yourself healed and avoid enemies as much as possible. If you get this ending, as soon as Elster reaches the cryopod room within the Penrose, she freezes. Unable to gather the willpower to enter the room, she flees and exits the ship, taking off her armor, collapsing on the planet's surface, and dying all by herself. Promise. The promise ending is obtained by playing the game the complete opposite way, killing everything and losing a lot of health. Getting rid of all the enemies and taking damage is how you unlock this ending, and is the first ending that I obtained. Elster successfully enters the room and talks to Arian, who tells her that it's time for this to end. Elster, struggling to come to terms with it, ultimately decides to fulfill the promise that they made, and ends Arian's suffering. She kisses her one last time before laying next to her and succumbing to her injuries. Memory. The memory ending is obtained if you're basically playing through the game again and know all the puzzles, or you're like a serious savant when it comes to solving puzzles. If you beat the game in under 6 hours, you unlock this ending. Elster is able to muster up the strength to enter the cryopod room and kisses Arian's head to wake her up, but Arian can't remember Elster. As if realizing the futility in her endeavor, Elster lays down next to Arian and succumbs to her wounds, content with staying by her side for a little longer. Despite all of these endings not necessarily leading to anything good truly happening, there's an argument to be made about all three of these endings in terms of whether they're the quote-unquote best. It's implied earlier in the game that a cycle has been happening over and over again, with the only person realizing it being Adler. Every dead Elster between the elevator and the Red Sands imply another instance of an Elster unit having tried to reach Alina. Most of them hadn't reached the point that your Elster had, where she realized she was actually trying to reach Ariane. Keyword being most. There's been one to have surpassed this point, one who managed to break through this mental barrier and track down Ariane. Just like you, she realized the error in what she believed her promise was, but somehow fell during it. It's the same Elster that you took the armor from. These endings all leave a version of Elster that was left dying at the end of their cycle. While the leave ending could theoretically break this cycle, you end up seeing Elsters who have also given up laying in the Red Sands in the fake out ending, without any damage on them at all. The memory ending is likely the main Elster that you find sitting next to Ariane, one who ran through her cycle quickly in order to just have one more moment with her lover. Wouldn't that mean that the promise ending is the best ending then? Well, probably, but also probably not. Like Memory, Promise also leaves Elster by Ariane's side. Despite the fact she apparently fulfilled her promise, it could have proved to be a futile effort given the fact that you sit in the exact same pose that each post-Alina Elster finds their past incarnation in. I love time loops. In her mind, she might have fulfilled her promise, but how do you truly do that if you're dead? It's been established that Ariane has been sitting in her cryopod, tortured by radiation and poisoning and unable to end her suffering herself as the Penrose floats non-functionally in space. Everything that's been happening in the game has been a result of this unknown magical power of bioresonance, with Ariane jumbling up the perception of the world. And not only through Elster either, somehow she's able to reach the similarly bioresonant Falk all the way back on Lang. But still, Elster succumbed to a sickness of her own and died. Unless a non-corporeal version of Elster was able to kill Ariane in her mind, how could the cycle truly end? You could argue that this is at least partially what happened, as after Elster kills Ariane, she's hit with a corruption and is damaged as a result. If she was psionically or telepathically tied to Ariane, then yeah, that would make sense, but something you'll quickly realize about this game is that there's no clear answer. One thing that all these endings have in common is that they leave the story open for another entry into the cycle. Sure, you could pick each detail of the ending and try to say that this one is actually the best, but I can't bring myself to come to such a conclusion. Despite the fact that I said I could earlier. I lied to you, I'm sorry. The only thing I can say for sure is that the initial fake out ending is definitely the worst one. It's an Elster that never truly realizes who she's looking for and as a result gives up on her promise. However, there is one more ending I failed to mention thus far. Remember the locked safe within Ariane's room that you were unable to do anything with? Well, if you go through the game one more time and use the radio, you'll find that specific frequencies translate into slow scan television imagery. These images lead you toward the specific point of where you need to stand. With the frequency still playing, you interact with the space and are granted 3 keys. The key of love, the key of eternity, and the key of sacrifice. In finding these keys, you're now able to unlock the safe in Ariane's room. Using the Actone code that the game throws at you in the beginning, you unlock the safe and find a lily. If you choose to pick the lily up, you reject picking up the key in yellow and don't fight Falk. Elster places the lily on some kind of pillar and, despite never gaining any injuries from Adler, appears to just fall and die, laying on the ground with a group of other versions of herself next to each pillar. An artifact sits in the center, and in German, the text appears. The mystery of this god has been completed, as she declared to her servants, the prophets. We all have our own interpretations of art. The initial question I had when finding this ending was, has the cycle been broken? It's never that simple though. There's always more going on under the hood. Or I guess. Trying to make sense of a game like this is a challenge in and of itself. It's almost on the same level of some ARGs with how much material is sprinkled throughout. The Isle of Life, the Isle of the Dead, the Keys, the Lily, the King in Yellow, the Shore of Oblivion, Lang, and some more stuff that I haven't even mentioned. There's a lot to keep track of, and without knowing every aspect of these pieces of art makes the act of dissecting this game on your first run pretty close to impossible. Despite the fact that SIGNALIS takes a page from the King in Yellow and making us confused as fuck by the end of the first playthrough, we can still go back and try to make sense of it. The game digs into how one interprets the set pieces it gives them. There's no one answer to a lot of what's going on. There's a colossal fuck ton of stuff that I failed to mention with my brush through of the story. There's countless amounts of symbolism and untied story threads that would probably end up making this video like 6 hours long, but the main thing that stuck out to me in my interpretation of the game was the Isle of the Dead, which was made by Swiss painter Arnold Böcklin. It's an island that, despite being in the game as all of its renditions as the real painting, a 2D sprite, and even as a real 3D modeled area, is never actually reachable. Aside from these flashed appearances, you also see the third version of the painting spread throughout the game, at least 2 of which were made by Ariane. The meaning of the isle isn't clearly stated by its author, but given the title, it's some rendition of the inevitable end of life. If we were to take from, say, Greek mythology, it could represent the boatman of the river Styx, Charon, taking those who have died into the afterlife through this isle. Through Signalis, the meaning of the art piece is turned into Ariane's yearning for death, for Charon to take her soul into the isle. Unfortunately, given her circumstances, she's unable to be granted entrance into the island, and stuck in what she can only describe as hell. With all the context given to us after playing through the game and understanding persona degradation, it's understood that Elster had been confused on who she was looking for due to her memories as a Gestalt, Lilith Ito, the other woman in the Alina photo. In the fake ending, Elster is going through her memories of her past Gestalt life due to the similarities in relationship between Elster and Ariane and Lilith and Alina. During this, the Isle of Life appears, another painting by Böcklin. In this piece, people actually appear on the small piece of land and in the waters, seeming joyful and happy. This isle appears at least twice within the ending, once within Elster's silhouette, and once during a flashing collage of the isle paintings. Not only that, but during the sequence of paintings and flashbacks, we get to see another character standing in front of the same arrangement of pillars as the artifact ending, with the lily even placed atop one of the pillars. The only character I can think of being here would be Lilith. Perhaps the artifact ending is a convergence of the isles. Elster, by denying the King in Yellow, reaches Ariane through the lily that Lilith once used, and as a result, allows for the two to come together and accept their fates, ultimately choosing to suffer together. But this is Signalis, so who truly knows? There's always something unattainable to everyone, some kind of painful reminder that we're limited by our human bodies. Even if our suffering isn't nearly on the same scale as Ariane and Elster, there's value in how we choose to understand our limitations. How you choose to live your life comes from these limitations, the cards you're dealt, and in understanding that, you too can find the strength to dance. Or let the lesbian space robot brain rot consume you. Your choice. Before the video comes to an end, I have a small announcement. I'm opening up a Patreon and a coffee. If you'd like to help me keep making more videos, consider supporting me. If subscriptions aren't your cup of tea, then coffee is there for one-time donations too. Patrons get access to high-quality art, occasional posts that detail what I'm up to, and their name at the end of each video on the scrolling wall. Those who want to support me the most will get their name listed out by me and have a fun little doodle of their character drawn on the wall too. I've got a video coming out after this one that'll detail my plans a little more clearly, so look out for that if you're interested. Thanks for watching. See ya.